call to order Planning Commission meeting. Thank you for those in attendance and those online. We always start our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance, so if you'd please rise. First item is to approve the agenda, and we have an amended agenda.
I move to approve the amended agenda.
This is Barb. I'll second that.
Okay, I'll call for the vote.
Bethany, I.
Barb, aye.
Judy, aye.
And Lynn, aye. Next is the approval of the Planning Commission meeting minutes from May 17th, 2023.
This is Barb. I'll move to approve.
This is Bethany, I'll second.
Call for the motion, or for the vote.
Judy, aye.
Barb, aye.
Bethany, I.
Lynn, aye. Next is the approval of the May 17th, 2023 public hearing minutes, ordinance 23-03, Chapter 7A, administrative variances for low floor elevation regulations for pre-1990 dwellings.
This is Barb. Move to approve, please.
This is Bethany, I'll second.
I'll call for the vote.
Judy, aye.
Barb, aye.
Bethany, I.
And Lynn, aye. Next is the approval of the May 17th, 2023 public hearing minutes, ordinance 2304, Chapter 7C-7D, wetland zoning and stormwater management regulations.
This is Barb. Motion to approve.
This is Judy, I second.
I'll call for the vote.
Bethany, I.
Barb, aye.
Judy, aye.
And Lynn, aye. Next is the approval of the June 21st, 2023 Planning Commission meeting minutes.
This is Bethany, motion to approve.
This is Barb. I'll second that.
I'll call for the vote.
Judy, aye.
Barb, aye.
Bethany, I.
And Lynn, aye. Next, we'll open the public hearing. Eleanor, would you read the notice as published in the Forest Lake Times?
Of course. Notice is hereby given that a public hearing will be held by the City of Columbus Planning Commission on Wednesday, July 19th, 2023 at 6 p.m. or as soon thereafter as parties may be heard. The hearing will be conducted in person and by interactive technology at the Columbus City Hall located at 16319 Kettle River Boulevard, Columbus, Minnesota, to consider a request for a variance to reduce an accessory structure setback from 75 feet to 73.4 feet in the rural residential zoning district. Members of the public interested in attending in person, monitoring the meetings, or wanting more information should contact the city offices at 651-464-3120 or visit the city website at columbusmn.us. The hearing shall continue until all evidence and testimony has been received. The applicant is Thomas Vachna, and the property location is 18760 Jennings Street Northeast, Columbus, Minnesota.
Thank you, Eleanor. Now I will ask Thomas Vachna to please come to the table in the front, have a seat, and then give your name and address for everyone in the room and on Zoom to hear.
Thomas Vaca, 18760 Jennings Street Northeast, Columbus, Minnesota.
The commission reviewed your application as a normal protocol for the record. Could you brief us a little bit about your application and plans?
The application was actually started with the previous administration. And of course, before the first contractor, we also ran into COVID. I made the application to the watershed and got their approval and so on and so forth. Got the slab done, and Second contractor was overworked and understaffed, and winter was closing in, so it got put off till spring once again, and here we are.
For the record, did you receive a copy of the staff report developed by Associate Planner Frank Keenan dated July 14th, 2023 regarding this application?
I don't recall that.
Okay, this report notes certain findings.
Excuse me, was it by mail or?
It was via email, Mr. Vaca.
If it was by email, I have had trouble with the internet, so, no, I didn't.
Okay. Frank, do you want to read your findings for Mr. Vaca?
Sure.
Since he didn't receive them.
So basically, after reviewing the application, I made, now there's 6 findings that are needed for a variance to be approved. The first is that the landowner proposes to use the property in a reasonable manner, and after review, that was a finding that I made. The proposed expansion is a reasonable use. The plight of the landowner is due to circumstances unique to the property and is not created by the landowner. The property has several restrictions. There is the pipeline easement. There's the curvature of the street, which creates difficulties in this particular property. These circumstances are unique to the property and were not created by the landowner. And he also does not have much room for an expansion on the south side because of the placement of the house. Now, the third finding is granting the variance is in harmony with the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance. We have accessory buildings by right, and most accessory buildings are built in the side yard of residential lots. And the way he has it built is that the front facade of the home is aligned with the front facade of the accessory structure. And more than 99% of the accessory structure of the square footage is outside the setback area. But the curvature of the street, if not for the curvature of the street, the accessory building would meet code requirements. So it's in alignment with the zoning ordinance. I believe that the accessory structure is also consistent with the city's comprehensive plan. It's rural residential. We have accessory structures in those areas, and other than the setback, it conforms to rural residential requirements. It will continue to reflect the residential character, and the placement of the building to the side is consistent with the character of the neighborhood. Now, there's also the variance, if granted, will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. He's in a neighborhood of mostly 4 to 20 acre residential lots, and accessory buildings are permitted in the rural residential district. Other nearby properties also have accessory buildings, and because of the current conditions of the property and the neighboring area, his accessory structure will not alter the character of the neighborhood. And finally, the practical difficulty is not solely created by economic difficulties. It's not created by economic difficulties, but by the shape of the lot and constraint of the public utility easement located on the property. I do have a couple recommendations as conditions of approval. The first is that the proposed accessory structure will not exceed the proposed dimensions as laid out in the variance packet dated and completed on June 8th, 2023. And the applicant must submit all other materials required by planning and zoning and building department to complete the building permit application review. Now, we've been working with Mr. Vaca on this, and we do have most of those materials already. There's just going to be need to be some adjustments just because the dimension changed from what we, the applications we previously had. So that condition, I think, will be fairly easily met.
Thank you, Frank. Do any of the commissioners have any questions for Mr. Vaca?
I do not.
I don't.
Thank you, Mr. Vaca, for coming. You can go sit down now. I'd like to open the public hearing to anyone online or here that would like to address the commission due to this. If not, we will close the public hearing and open up the floor for the Planning Commission to discuss the application. And I will start and tell you, and I know Barb did too, actually went out and looked at the property, and he's got no neighbors to ask or, that he's even close to, so I really don't see a problem with what he wants to do. The road does kind of curve, so it's a little kittywampus a little bit, but he's doing it to put his motorhome in and a couple other trailers and siding it just like the garage that's there. So I actually don't see a problem with anything. So Barb, do you have any take on it?
No, I think they've done a wonderful job of doing all the paperwork, and I want to thank you for taking the time and having patience, and we really appreciate that.
I appreciate you two coming out and looking so you can see that to keep the width of the building motorhome compliant and still be able to put a boat and a trailer in there, that I would have to move the outside corner in at a 45-degree angle on the front, which would make the front of that corner of the building set back 18 more inches than the rest of the building. So instead of being straight across from the existing building, when you got to the north corner, it, would turn. For an 18-inch variance, I think I'm being reasonable.
Yeah, no, it will look very nice, I'm sure. So thank you for coming.
Okay, appreciate you ladies coming out.
Sure. Well, if there's no other questions, then I'll look for a motion.
Okay.
This is Judy. I make the motion to recommend approval of the variance request to the City Council to reduce the front yard setback from 75 feet to 73.4 feet for Thomas A. Vaca, 18760 Jennings Street, property ID number 363322110005, based on findings of fact number 1 through 6 and recommendations number 1 and 2 of the planner's report dated July 14th, 2023.
There's a second?
This is Barb, I'll second that.
Okay, I'll call for the vote.
Judy, aye.
Barb, aye.
Bethany, aye.
And Lynn, aye. So this will be presented to the City Council next Wednesday, July 26th at 6 p.m. Sure.
Thank you again for coming.
Yeah, thank you. Now we'll open a public hearing and discussion for ordinance 23-02, Chapter 7A, Commercial Design Standards on pages 16 through 28.
All right.
Eleanor, would you like to read the public notice?
Notice is hereby given that a public hearing will be held by the City of Columbus Planning Commission on Wednesday, July 19th, 2023 at 6 p.m., or as soon thereafter as parties may be heard. The hearing will be conducted in person and by interactive technology at the Columbus City Hall, located at 16319 Kettle River Boulevard, Columbus, Minnesota, to consider a city code amendment to add language clarifying color requirements, updating building material standards, lowering masonry requirements, creating additional illumination standards, requiring minimum square footage for commercial buildings, authorizing the zoning administrator to allow modifications to prior approved fencing, screening, or landscaping plans, and housekeeping amendments. A full copy of the proposed ordinance is available for review during regular business hours in the city administrator's office at the address listed above, or viewed on the city website. Members of the public interested in attending in person, monitoring the meetings, or wanting more information should contact the city offices at 651-464-3120 or visit the city website at columbusmn.us. The hearing shall continue until all evidence and testimony has been received.
Thank you, Eleanor. Dean, are you going to take the lead on this?
Sure.
Okay, because there doesn't seem to be anybody in attendance to talk about it, so.
Do we have anybody online?
No?
Oh, well, I'm a popular guy.
You really are.
So this is a 12-page ordinance, which on the surface might seem lengthy or intimidating, but it really isn't. There's a lot of repetition. Primarily, this ordinance was written up to provide some guidance and changes in design standards in the 7 different zoning districts in the freeway corridor. So this does not have any effect on the commercial industrial or the commercial industrial light districts on Lake Drive. This is strictly limited to the freeway corridor. There were also some additional housekeeping amendments, some clarifications that provided, in the first instance, the zoning administrator to have some authority to review modifications to some screening and fencing plans as long as they are consistent with the original approved plans. Examples that we gave during the workshops on this, we frequently get preliminary plans, whether it be fences or landscaping, and primarily commercial, not necessarily residential. But the time frame happens, and as the previous gentleman says, the contractor got lost or got busy or whatever, and it postponed a whole season, things change. Or you get a new contractor and they go, we'd recommend you substitute these trees, they're better for that. We don't want to come back to the planning commission and the council. It's like, if it's the same quantity and it's the same intent, the zoning administrator would have that authority. The real meat and potatoes, again, 7 sections of this ordinance pertain to design standards, and I'll do this as quickly as I can. It was determined with all the massive amounts of materials and combinations that might be conceived that perhaps we were getting into the design business ourselves instead of trying to illustrate what we did want, or in this instance, maybe what we didn't want. And it became quite clear that the biggest issue for the freeway corridor was to be a different appearing design standard for commercial buildings than Lake Drive, where we have mainly metal buildings, and people wanted to see something different in the freeway corridor, and without going overboard trying to specify what that meant, we have a handful of materials that are acceptable, but the primary new material is that standing seam or ribbed metal panels are not permitted. So what you would typically suggest looks like a pole barn, which is fine in many circumstances you didn't want in the freeway corridor, and that's pretty clear. The other issue, I think the city was getting hung up on attempting to expand a color palette. We provided some examples in our work sessions, and it just gets kind of silly, perhaps, looking at trying to guide things when there might have been so many variations. Where do you draw the line? And our conclusion, again, what don't we want? We don't want bright, flashing, obnoxious colors, and that's basically what this says. And so those are the primary changes for design, but we also introduced a new standard, and that is that on properties that are at least an acre in size, And our minimum lot size in the commercial districts in the freeway corridor, because they have municipal sewer and water available, are ½ acre. But we created a new standard that said for any property equal to 1 acre or more, the minimum square footage of a building must be at least 7% of the net property acreage. So eliminate wetlands, easement areas, stormwater ponds, other encumbrances. And part of that was in response to a specific project, which was a 700 square foot building, which I think most of you thought was maybe a little small for a major commercial corridor. And so that is another new standard. I'm going to jump to the back of the remaining 2 pages, and these happen to be related to, oops, went too far. Fencing issues, and that was a clarification that whether it's residential or commercial, that corrugated plastic or corrugated metal, something you might make a chicken coop out of, wasn't exactly what we wanted to see for fencing next to neighbors. And so that clarification was made. And the other regards lighting.
Mr. Planner,
Yes.
before you run away?
Yes.
There was a clarifying question on this, so I'm going to look to you.
Okay.
This says, a decorative fence. A decorative fence. For the purposes of this section, a chain link fence with slats or fabrics is not a decorative fence. The finished side of the fence, the side having no structural support, shall face the residential property. So is this in a commercial district? Is it indicating that there's 2 unlike zoning districts? What if there's 2 residential properties?
I have to first make sure I understand the question.
And what was brought to me is, what if you have 2 residential properties? The person that's putting up the fence and the person that the fence is going to go towards. Which side is the good side go to? Because they're both residential properties.
In the context, I'd have to go look at the entire section. If this was the new residential screening section that applies to commercial properties, I don't know without looking.
It was just brought to my attention, and because we do have 2 residential properties in a commercial district, and you didn't mean when this is, so I wasn't sure what to, and I wasn't sure whether it's applied to everyone.
Let me, as long as we don't have an audience upset that we're trying to look up
Does
something.
everybody understand the question?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
looking for where it says that.
I want to find,
K,
I want to find the section.
you don't know where.
800.
K2?
Page 27.
Okay.
K2D2.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. I've just got to read this.
Elizabeth, I have a question. You mean 2 properties where they each want to build a fence? Is that what you're saying?
So I'm property owner A, and I want to build a fence.
Yeah.
And in the commercial district, we do have residential properties and commercial properties, so that's, you know what I mean? So you have, but there's also properties in the commercial district that have 2 residential properties. This question comes up a lot, which side do I get, you know what I mean? Which one is the better side, which it has to face? And it was brought to my attention that we should just clarify if this is a commercial property and a residential property, that's okay. But if they're 2 residential properties, does it go to the person who is not putting up the fence?
I would think so, just for aesthetic purposes.
But it doesn't say that.
Oh, Yeah, so then you would have to put it in there. The finished side of this, number I and D, the finished side of the fence, the side having no structural reports shall face the residential property. But you would think it would be the neighbor, the more aesthetic side would face.
The one who didn't put it up.
Right.
That's
Right,
what-
would that make sense?
Is that how it is in just residential zoning? When there's two resident, if in,
Well,
same situation, different zoning.
I can't remember this section, and I didn't have a chance to look it up quick. That's why I was asking, is this section just commercial, or is this section for apply to all? And I don't know that.
It's required residential screening.
So K is for residential screening, so you're thinking there should be a separate section for commercial screening in this area?
Well, sometimes these requirements apply to everything. So like, if you look section 7A813, it's miscellaneous business, residential, and institutional performance standards. So sometimes you have standards that just apply to everything, whether it's business, whether it's commercial. So it just depends on where it is in the
Okay,
district. But the way this is written, I didn't have a chance to look it up to see what section this was in.
no, and I finally found it. The first reference, fences, walls, hedges, I would say applies to any property, but subsection K was added by the city attorney several years ago as a result of conflicts between commercial abutting residential. So I think this entire section, the screening is with respect to any new non-residential structure, building addition, improvement, such and such. And then these conditions are applicable to them for what's abutting property. So the second one, where the addition is corrugated metal plastic, it's not terribly relevant to the purpose of that, but we added it there since we added it above. That's where it was requested. But subsection K, items 1 through 3, are for non-residential developments abutting residential. So does that answer your question?
It does, but in I, if that's only residential, that means there's no requirement to put the good side to your neighbor.
Yeah, and that's my first blush comment on what I falls under. These are general provisions. And K is written very specifically. That was in response to issues, and that's why that's more descriptive. So notwithstanding other provisions of the ordinance, fences, walls, hedges, there's another one where we could have gotten rid of capital letters, may be permitted. Okay, so they are allowed in any property not to obstruct the view. Yeah, this would apply to any property. And that, I believe, was presumed to be residential, and a residential instance, but I believe this applies to any property. And the point is not obstructing view, but here was where it was thought best to add, we don't want corrugated fencing, by the way.
Yeah, yes. So I guess here my point is, I just want to make sure everybody understands when we're doing fencing, we're adding that, but in the residential area, then the good side doesn't have to be out.
So we're saying, are we okay with that?
And that, I just want to make sure everyone's okay with that, because that's the rule. So in commercial property, commercial to residential, the good side has to go to the residential side. In the residential district, good side doesn't have to go up. The resident, or the person putting up the fence, could put the good side to them. Just saying.
I mean, you get the questions all
We
the
get,
time,
we get,
so.
we get the questions, we do.
Am I allowed to ask
Yes, yes.
What do you
what
want?
your opinion is based on you being the one who gets the
Right,
questions?
right.
Is that something I can?
What do we want?
It doesn't matter to me when you know what I mean? So, it was all brought, you know what I mean, this came up because we got a complaint. So that's why I kind of knew this section that we were working.
Right. I mean, it does make sense that the good side should go out. We just built a fence. I think the bad side is prettier than the good side, but it's just me. Depends on the fence.
And we can leave it, it's been like this forever, but I just want everybody to know that if they're asked that question, it's property owner preference.
I can tell you in urban communities, and again, 90%, maybe 95% of the application for residential, you're rural. And you would have a better idea, do you want to get into that issue in a very rural community? But in urban communities where the lots are 90 feet wide, 120 feet deep, they're very specific. The good side goes out. And you better have maintenance-free fencing because you have no right to go on the other side of your neighbor's property.
Right.
And people put them up there because they don't like their neighbor. And I don't know what your purpose is. And so if you're alienating each other, then I think to Elizabeth's point or question, do you want to change it? That's a policy. I don't have an opinion.
I mean, I think the nice side should be on the outside. Every fence I've had in my yards, I've had the back side, just to be nice, I mean.
Yeah, I think the nice side should go toward your neighbor, just to be neighborly and,
Yeah.
So if I understand what you're debating, in K, D, I, you add the finished side of the fence, blah, 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 shall face the neighboring property. You want to insert up in I.
yeah, face the residential neighbor's property. Right? The finished side of the fence shall face the
Hear it?
Yeah.
neighborly residential property.
Keep raining.
Yes.
So we want that inserted in II.
So do we need to add that in there more specifically, or?
I think we should.
I mean, I think that's fair. I don't always
Yeah,
love
right.
rules, but I feel like that's fair.
I do too.
Well, like you say, we don't hear all of the conversations that Elizabeth has. So what, it should be as thorough as possible to make
So
her
the premise is, I want the fence, I get to look at the
structural.
Backside. The support side.
so that my neighbor is not inconvenienced by me putting up my fence. They get
Right.
to look at, I think that's fair.
Yeah, I do too.
And then you use, what do they call it, fence art?
Oh,
You beautify it.
Oh, well, and gosh, most of the fences, I mean, seriously, like, we just put up a
Right.
fence, and the ugly side looks great. It's like not a problem, so.
Exactly.
But I think just to avoid conflict with your neighbor, that would be the wise thing for us.
Okay.
Well, and like Dean said, if there are structural problems that need repair, you can't go over on the neighbor's
Yeah.
property to take care of it, so I think it handles.
Well, if you think I know all the answers, in some communities, I can tell you, planners have recommended, and the ordinances read, that the fence must be 1 foot from the neighbor's property.
Yeah,
Get
I've
over
heard that.
there.
Well, how do you get over there to mow?
I know, I know.
Yeah.
So there's no right answer, but I'm glad you brought it up, and
Yeah.
I think there's consensus. So
Yes.
I can make that change before we send something to the city council.
So what
Okay.
is the verbiage?
It would be the finish, I have to read this carefully and make sure the grammar's right, but it would be adding, the finished side of a fence, the side having no structural support shall face the neighboring residential property. And I just got to reread this
Okay.
to make sure it fits. But this all started with, nobody wanted corrugated or
Exactly.
whatever fencing. So we'll leave that in and then clarify that. Thank you. before being rudely interrupted. We were finishing one thing on lighting, and that was a clarification that the Planning Commission previously, and I think some council discussions to clarify that the standard of a 1-foot candle illumination at all property lines should be 1/2 at residential and 1 at commercial. So that clarification is made. And then there was a discussion when the Caribou store was built that our ordinance requires the cutoff luminaires or shrouding on everything. We don't say that about residential, so somebody can have a carriage light on their porch, but that clarification was never in here. So the last statement is to allow in commercial properties, as long as you don't exceed 100-watt incandescent lumen, that's 1,200 or 1,400 lumens, you don't have to shroud that because they wanted carriage lights on their building. So that's the last one. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
So we don't have anybody online or here. Can we make a motion to recommend this to the council with that correction?
Yep.
And then you'll word it
Yep.
ready for them? Okay.
Yep.
All right. So I'll close the public hearing. And then now, does anybody have any further comments? Sue, you're kind of quiet. We're not used to that.
Thank you. No, I agree with exactly what you said about the fence.
Okay. So I will look for a motion. But include the,
Okay, this is Barb. Motion to recommend the adoption of ordinance 2023-02, amending Chapter 7A of the City Columbus Code of Ordinances regulating commercial design standards with the changes discussed at this meeting.
is there a second?
This is Judy. I will second that motion.
Okay, I will call for the vote.
Judy, aye.
Barb, aye.
Bethany, aye.
Lynn, aye. Yay.
Anybody got their windows open?
Hope not.
I know.
Kind of late now, I think.
Bethany, aye.
Well needed rain. Okay, now we will go to finish the discussion that we started at the last meeting, Chapter 7A, swimming pool fencing requirements on pages 29 through 47, and handout H1 through H18, and I will let Frank take it over.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. Now that we have some resolution on commercial design standards, our next task is resolving the pool fence height ordinance. So I'm going to just go ahead and dive right in. No, oh gosh, no pun intended, I'm sorry.
That was a pretty good one.
So on the next slide, just to kind of go back and reset, I've got another bad joke coming up. I want to talk about what swimming pools are, just so we know what the discussion is about. So it's definitely not the water that is collecting in the pothole outside. In the city, swimming pools are more than 5,000 gallons of water and have a water depth of 3 feet. And swimming pools are regulated, as we discussed last time, in Section 7A 807, and we'll be mostly focusing on the fence ordinance, which is 7A 805K. I'm sorry, I might have misspoke before. Or no, I'm sorry, I misspoke that time. It's 7A 807K. And back in December 2021, during the big overhaul of the zoning code, automatic pool covers were added to the code as a substitute for a fence. A little bit of background on this for the planning commissioners that weren't on during that time. There were several variances for automatic pool covers before the December 2021 code revision, and I believe adding it to the code just simplified the process for residents. Now, in 2022, there were inquiries about fence height requirements for above-ground pools, including a direct inquiry by a resident to study fence height requirements for above-ground pools. So on the next slide, I'll recap our discussion on the last meeting a little bit. So there was some consensus or agreement on certain aspects of what the pool fence height code should require. And this included the need for definitions for an in-ground pool and above-ground pool, and also the need to make it clear that automatic pool covers are for in-ground pools only. There was also talk about a need of requiring the pool cover to be on when the pool is unattended. There was a desire for a consistency between the pool wall height and the fence height. And it was also pointed out that the city council had already discussed latches for gates, and the decision was, at that time, it would be an ineffective requirement when the city council made that decision to not include requiring latches for gates. And this was reiterated at the city council meeting on June 28th. And on the next slide, I will talk about some of the other topics at the June 28th council meeting regarding pool fences. Councilmember Wagaman, I apologize. I don't mean to steal your thunder. I know you were going to discuss, but feel free to jump in. I kind of heard your discussion from that meeting. The council was in agreement with the planning commission that definitions are needed for in-ground pools and above-ground pools. It was also noted that the measuring point for fences and pools needed to be clarified, and there was consensus that in-ground pools should have a 5-foot fence with a gate. Above-ground pools should have a 4-foot minimum sidewall height, and as part of that, there will need to be a part of the code that the ladder cannot be left in the pool unattended. Above-ground pools with a deck should include a 36-inch high guard railing with a gate. And with all of that information, I went back and revised what I initially wrote to align better with what the Planning Commission and City Council thought should be included. So on the next slide, what that entails is we'll discuss Elizabeth. Thank you. So what we'll just go through these one by one in just a little bit. This is more of a preview, and we can kind of touch on those when we get there. So to start, I revised the introduction actually to section 7A807, just kind of provide some clarity and make it a little bit easier to read. I also added definitions for in-ground pools and above-ground pools. I reorganized section 7A807K into 5 different parts based on different circumstances. And those, circumstances include a lot about what we talked about for in-ground pools, pool covers, above-ground pools, above-ground pool decks, and gate latches. So we can start going through these changes, and feel free to interrupt if there is something you would like to discuss. And I will pause in a couple parts just to gather some feedback from the Planning Commission, just to make sure we get all our I's dotted and T's crossed. So first, based on the direction I was given, I added separate definitions for in-ground and above-ground pools. And this will separate pools into 2 distinct categories. And because of this definition and some other parts of 7A807, I replaced references to underground with in-ground. And Madam Chair?
Yeah, so I don't save it all for later. So one thing I just circled here was above-ground swimming pool, a swimming pool with any part of the sidewall exposed above the surrounding grade level. So I had a above-ground swimming pool, but it was dug half into the ground and only 2.5 feet was above the ground. So the city asked me to conform, which I was totally fine with, and consider it an in-ground pool and have a 6-foot fence around it, because once you dig it into the ground, it becomes you have a deep end that was 10 feet deep. So then it is essentially an in-ground pool. If you look at this, though, it says any part of the sidewall exposed above. So I want to clarify, if they do dig half of it into the ground and have half above, then you don't have a 3-foot pool anymore. You can now essentially have a 6 to 10, depending on how far they dig in. So do we need to clarify that?
So we're looking at 7A201-104B, swimming pool with any part of any sidewall exposed above the surrounding, and this is exposed above the surrounding grade level.
So your above ground should be without excavating, that none of the sidewall goes underground. It sits flat on the ground. I think once you dig in, then you're no longer an above ground pool.
So,
It doesn't happen very often,
Sure.
but people do.
but we have to look at these.
Yeah, I mean, now's the time to
situations.
deal with it instead of rewriting it later.
So if, in that definition, if I'm understanding correctly, if I were to strike any and replace, maybe I should just read out what I'm trying to think, and then we can discuss what will be struck and what would be added. So if I were to put in a swimming pool with no part of any sidewall below the surrounding grade level.
Yes.
So I would strike any, and in its place, put no. Strike exposed above and replace with below.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you for pointing that out. Mr. Johnson?
I just wanted to ask a question, so I understand. This was an experience you had in another community.
I had one of these
Yeah,
pools.
okay.
When I lived in North St. Paul, so.
It becomes pretty subjective, where you're going to draw the line, 1 foot down, one. Can you say the majority of the sidewall is above ground, and that makes the distinction? It sounded to me
I'm
like
just
you were.
trying to cut it clean.
Yeah,
And so I had a 5-foot wall on my pool, and 2.5 feet went into the ground and 2.5 were up. Then it was 16 by 32, and we dug out the deep end to make it 10 feet, because there's no bottom on it, so you can dig to however you want. The problem is if you don't make it, if you let them go below, you'll never know how far below they really are. I mean, just be cut and dry, because then you have a deep end of 10 feet of water. So we were required to put up a 6-foot fence. In this case, they could put up a fence or they could buy a cover for it, like an in-ground pool.
and so if the distinction is, if it's less than,
It's just a cheap
4
way of
feet.
having an in-ground pool without,
no, I know, I'm trying to
Yeah.
accomplish the same thing.
Yeah.
What's the easiest way to describe it? So if it's, I think last meeting you were debating 5 feet, now it's 4. So anything under 4, you'd have to put those things up, right? Barriers. And in your case, I mean, that's such a peculiar hybrid. I don't know if there's an easy way to do it. Would have,
Or you just say hybrid pools are considered in-ground pools.
yeah.
Yeah.
Have a third definition.
Either that or you.
Because here's the thing, you can put up an above-ground pool and have the whole sidewall above. You don't know if they dug out underneath. When you put in the water that we put in, you had to dig underneath because you were containing, 20 to 25,000 gallons of water. But you could drive by, I don't know, maybe people,
But is the point that if it's above ground, now we only need to add 3 feet of railing?
that's
Around
what,
the top.
right,
So-
that's where
so
I'm getting
Now your
at.
above-ground pool could be down, and you still add that 3 feet, but with the
But you're gonna-
in-ground pool, we're requiring
Right,
5 feet.
yeah, and you're gonna have the water of an in-ground pool.
Well, but even if you didn't, it would be ground level, and say it's only 3 feet and doesn't have a deep end, that's not a requirement for the fencing.
But the requirement for fencing for an in-ground is higher than
Exactly,
Right.
exactly, but because now you've sunk it down, if you consider it above ground, then our fence is wrong.
So what North St. Paul did is your fence was determined by water level.
Oh, okay.
So you had to have a fence so high from the water level. Didn't matter if you had 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet sidewalls. At that time, the fence was water level.
I'm on the same page with Judy. If the issue is making it unclimbable or whatever, who cares if there's a deep end?
Right.
So if you had an in-ground pool and it had no deep end, you'd still require a fence or a cover. So I'm just trying to distinguish your question, and I don't mean to steal your thunder, Frank.
And that's fine. I'm just looking at a swimming pool with any part of a sidewall exposed. So then, say you only have a foot, then you put the fence to whatever we decide, to 5 foot or 4 foot. Right?
Well, with an above-ground pool, you have this high of a wall, and then we're requiring 3 feet above that. With an in-ground pool, we're requiring is it 5 or 4? I can't remember.
I think it's
And the whole point is the fence height above the ground.
Right? But what if our ordinance says a 4-foot sidewall does not require a fence, and they dig part of that 4-foot
Right. And
sidewall
so that's
into the
what-
ground?
That's what would negate.
Yeah.
Sidewall above ground.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's
yeah.
direction that, without getting so sophisticated, I think we
yes.
could have kidney-shaped pools and who cares?
Yeah.
It's the unclimbable portion of this that you're trying to regulate. And that's a great example.
And it just happened. What are the odds that these people did this last weekend?
Yeah.
But I drive by every day. They have a 4-foot sidewall pool, and it's huge, and the ladder never comes out, okay? So unattended, does that mean in use, not home, whatever? But they built a jungle gym next to the pool, and the piece that's right next to the pool is a little tree house with the colored roof, and there's no gate on it. There's little steps. A 2-year-old could climb up this. And there's a slide on one side, but on the other end, you jump into the pool.
not good.
So,
Platform diving.
yeah, so now
Treehouse.
you can't move a jungle gym. And I was like, oh my gosh, what were the chances of this happening last weekend?
Yeah, good examples.
But I'm just trying to put it out there now. If we you have a 4-foot sidewall and you're required to put up a foot fence, they would have to put a gate there when in use. But that jungle gym would be gated. So that, I mean, there's a lot, I just look at it like if you're gonna have a pool, you better be responsible and you better take on that responsibility of caring about what might happen. So,
And I don't think we can write enough detail. to
Right.
cover every situation.
No,
Right.
and people will do what they're going to do anyway.
yeah. I mean, you can say that the steps have to come out, but it's not gonna happen.
Okay.
If you get a 4-foot sidewall to take steps out, it's gonna be challenging. So, sorry.
No, I'm glad we did that. So there is a little bit later in here, more clarification about things, the fence or wall height being above grade. So with that being said, do we still want to go ahead and do the strike through and replacement that I proposed? Or do we want to keep the above ground pool definition that I initially drafted before this meeting?
I just think that it's above, the sidewall is above ground. Whatever, Jess. Because it was good.
And we're not going to include anything on a hybrid pool as a third definition?
And I was going to say, if I do change this to a swimming pool with no part, above ground swimming pool, to a swimming pool with no part of any sidewall below the surrounding grade, I believe that we should, or for your recommendation, the in-ground swimming pool definition should be tweaked so that it's primarily is struck through and replaced with the word, I had it just a second ago, partially, just so everything still matches. And I think that might take care of that hybrid part.
Yep.
So in that case, I will go ahead, strike through primarily, put in partially. And with that, is there any other thoughts regarding these two definitions at the moment?
No.
Excellent. So I will move on to the pool introduction. That is going to be section 7A 807, just at the beginning. I got the suggestion to change this wording just to make it a little bit more simplified. The phrases hot tub and spa have been removed as their inclusion is not really necessary. What the definition of a pool is already in there. So while the wording has changed, the intent of the ordinance is still the same. It still has the 5,000 gallon and 3-foot depth standard. So if there are no thoughts on that, I'll,
Okay, I'm gonna
Sure.
jump in here. So if the ordinance says 5,000 gallons or 3 feet, then maybe we should go 3 feet, need not have a fence, and then do a 5-foot, you have to have a 2-foot fence. I mean, if you're gonna have the ordinance here that you need a permit for over 3 feet, then over in the ordinance, maybe non-climbable sidewall, well, 4 feet above does not need a fence. Well, maybe we should make that 3 feet and have a 2-foot fence,
What page are you on?
35.
So the section I'm talking about is on 34, the beginning of 7A 807.
No, I was on 35, number 3.
He was talking about this.
Oh,
First, he
okay,
was starting-
okay.
Yeah, so this
I
is.
was just looking at the comparison.
Okay, sure, sure. So I'll just jumping back to
Okay.
this. I guess, is there any thoughts? This is just kind of the basic description of what a swimming pool is by our standard. And I don't know if there's any other thoughts regarding this. I just felt like hot tub or came to the conclusion that hot tub or spa is not really necessary. It's 5,000 gallons, 3 feet depth, just what it is. Yeah,
Are you saying that we won't regulate those then?
pardon?
If you take out that regulation, you will no longer regulate spas or
Hot tubs.
hot tubs over 3 feet and 5,000 gallons.
If by the way it's written, it's any container or structure with a water capacity greater than 5,000 gallons and a depth greater than 3 feet. That
Automatically
is,
includes it?
that is the term swimming pool in this section. So if they call it a hot tub, if they call it a spa, otherwise, there was no definition of hot tub or spa in the code, so those would need to be added. But I think you bring up a good point, how we want to approach that. If we want to just leave it a little bit simpler like this and just say, these things make this a swimming pool in this section, and this is how we regulate it. Or we need to start looking at if we want to include hot tub and spa.
Clearly, a hot tub or a spa is not a swimming pool. So I think they did it for ease, saying, if it's larger than this, these are the rules you're going to go by. I think it was just simplifying the ordinance. I think, and if you don't want to do that, then you take that out, then we don't regulate them unless you make a new section. I won't convince somebody if they call me that a hot tub or a spa is a swimming pool. They just, you know what I mean, on the phone, they're going to tell me that it is not. A swimming pool is not or a hot tub or a spa is not a swimming pool.
Are there very many, I don't know anything about hot tubs, but do they hold more than 5,000 gallons of water?
So then they wouldn't have been included anyway.
It'd be an awfully large one. The question is, I'm not aware of communities that regulate hot tubs in the fashion that you are talking here.
Yeah.
Hot tubs all have covers, the spas have covers. It's an economic thing, why they put
Right.
covers on them.
Right.
Because they're expensive to heat.
Yeah.
And so people generally don't feel they're unattended. And so I agree with Frank about the distinction in what you're accomplishing. Everything else in this section is strictly limited to pool.
Right.
Above or below ground.
Right.
And so the bigger policy issue, do you feel a need to regulate spas and hot tubs? Or do you just wash your hands of it and they're not included here?
Well, and if they're generally not greater than 5,000 gallons, even with the previous wording, they wouldn't be regulated in this anyway.
There are some big ones, and I wouldn't swear to what the gallonage is. And-
Sure.
And certainly, some of them get to be more than 3 feet deep. But if you go back to the definition of
Sure.
what the in-ground swimming pool and above ground, technically, is a spa become an above-ground swimming pool if it had more than 3 feet depth and 5,000 gallons?
They're not usually more than 3 feet high, though.
Right there. Anyway,
I mean, I've not seen one more than 3 feet high.
Talking about outside dimension or the depth of the water? I've seen them 5 feet tall,
Oh, okay.
and you climb in them and sit on a bench, comes up to your neck, and your knees touch, I mean, it's a seat. It's
But
gotta be more than 3
They
feet.
also have hard covers. And if,
That was my earlier point. This is a
Yes.
policy matter. If you want to regulate tubs and spas, that's fine. I think it becomes a separate subsection,
a separate,
because right now you're
Item.
distinguishing two other things and coming up with rules, and Frank's current attempt is to, make the language a little more clear, so it's easier to,
Yes.
if we're going to throw,
it should be a separate.
they should be separate. And so, does anyone feel the need, I don't know, does anybody here have a hot tub?
No.
Not anymore.
I just looked it up, and it looks
Do you
like
want the
the,
government regulating that, Mr. Mayor?
Well, they are 4 feet tall.
Yep.
You have to go upstairs to get into it.
Yep.
And then there's benches, like you said.
Do you have a hard
But
cover?
it has a latchable cover.
Okay.
And so we're exempting swimming pools with the latchable cover from having a fence.
So okay, so we have in-ground swimming pools with the hard cover that needs to be locked. Then we have a separate line item for hot tub and spa with the same.
it says they're all,
but it also just fits,
Most of them.
doesn't it? Doesn't it fit,
7.
like, if it fits all the same regulations that we already have?
Latches.
Yeah.
And
I would say don't add it just to the swimming pool.
I would say that, I agree.
Okay.
And it does have a latch.
Most of them do, yeah.
Latch over the top to keep the heat in and keep it
Right.
Okay.
I mean, a 5-year-old's gonna get in, but not a 2-year-old. They're not hard to open.
Okay, Councilmember Hagelin. What's that?
A lap pool.
What the heck is that?
That would. I think it would end up, well,
That would be deeper than 3 feet.
But it would be considered a pool. It'd still be considered a pool, and the regulations of the over 5,000 gallons and above 3 feet would still apply.
it's an air,
Yeah.
Yep.
it's not like going to the Y and swimming 50 yards. It's staying in a 12-foot container.
Right.
Okay, I know what you're talking
Yeah.
about now. Okay.
And I don't know anything about them, if they have covers on them or not.
But they're usually deeper than 3 feet, I believe.
They're almost always indoors, but not.
Oh, you can buy them at the state fair. Let me- Yeah, amazing.
Who knew swimming pools was such a can of worms?
I know.
Speaking of State Fair, I would just like to remind people, please do not buy accessory buildings at the State Fair until you talk to your friendly planning and zoning team at City of Columbus. We will help you in whether or not it is to code, since it got brought up.
Okay, continue.
Sure. So just to be sure on this swimming pool section, we are okay with moving forward with this beginning part before 7A, so 7A807, but the part before letter A. Perfect. All right. So I will move along and go to the next slide, and this will begin the first of 5 slides where I present the fence height regulations, which we've all been waiting for. These will all be separate subsections now regarding pool fence heights. So I think this will make things not only easier to understand for residents, but also for us as city staff to enforce. And it will make clear what rules apply to different circumstances that a resident may have. And I'm going to go through these one by one. I'll pause in a couple different sections, but feel free to interrupt. I'll start with the in-ground pools subsection. Now, this looks pretty familiar. It's a revised version of the existing ordinance. I added clarification that the fence is measured from the grade. I also included the part about an automatic security cover can be used as an exception for in-ground pools, but the requirements for covers, the actual requirements for covers will be in a separate subsection, which I can explain in the next discussion slide unless there's any comments on this. Perfect. So Elizabeth, these kind of go between pictures and discussion slides. I just put these in here in case we need them for reference. Just it's sometimes easier just have them in there. So on this one, based on the discussion from the previous Planning Commission meeting, I made it clear that the cover exception now is only for in-ground pools. I also added that covers must be closed when the pool is unattended. So Elizabeth keeps us planners on our toes, and what she pointed out to me is that the ordinance I wrote, the locking device has to be key operated. Now, if you saw in your packet, I included the brand new ASTM International Standards. It literally came out last week, so we've got the latest and greatest in pool cover security. And in that, it does list various devices that can be used for security, such as keys, combo locks, and special tools. So based on this, I would propose eliminating the key operated in parentheses that you'll find on page 35, letter K, subsection 2, in-ground pool covers shall be locking, and then I would just strike through that key operated because we are going by the ASTM International Standards, will be covered by all these other things that they list, and they certainly know a little bit more about pool covers than I do, so I'll take their word for it. And with that, I don't know if there's any thoughts on this subsection, or if the Planning Commission agrees with striking through key operated. I just want to make sure.
I agree.
Yep.
Perfect, I'm seeing nodding heads. All right, so I will move on. We got
Did you
some,
have a comment on this section on page 35?
Mine's number 3.
number
Oh,
three.
number 3, okay.
All right, we're getting to that. One more slide, perfect. Above ground pools, so I'll just really quick kind of present what I was thinking, just for what I changed. I added that measurements are from grade level. And I know at the last meeting, there was discussion about the consistency between sidewall height and fence height, and it was settled that 5 feet would be the standard. However, City Council has given direction indicating that pool fences should be 5 feet, but above-ground pool walls should be 4 feet. And given the direction, I didn't change the above-ground pool wall height of 4 feet from our last discussion. However, this is, if you do decide to make a recommendation to the City Council tonight, and want the recommendation to include a 5 feet for wall heights, I can make that edit. It is your decision on what to recommend to the City Council. But the City Council has discussed that 4 feet is where they landed for pool wall heights.
I did personally, after I left and I was driving home, I was like, well, it doesn't necessarily have to be consistent because a 4-foot high above ground pool, completely above ground pool, is just not as deep as an in-ground pool. And so the kids that can get, it's like a taller kid can get in, but a taller kid is a lot less likely to drown. So the inconsistency has a reason. That's all. And it's not just like a dumb inconsistency. It's like, well, an above-ground pool is going to be more shallow, therefore less of a drowning thing. I don't know.
I went to my niece's house and I had my 16-year-old niece go up to her 4-foot wall and without the ladder and say, can you get in, and flopped herself in. I mean, I've lived by kids that drowned in pools, so that's a concern for me. I just think that if we're gonna, if you don't have a cover on your in-ground pool and you have to put a 5-foot fence up, it's the same thing. 5,000, I was Googling pools, 5,000 gallons of water is a pretty small pool. So if you're having a 4-foot high, I mean, that's still gonna probably be about 15,000 gallons of water.
Right, but wouldn't it only be 3.5 feet deep? Ish?
Well,
mean,
it
it can't-
depends on I'm not worried about people drowning if they can't get in.
Sometimes they can't get out, that's the problem.
Right.
With
So-
animals, and if there's no way to get out once you get in there.
Yeah.
They don't have that's why I think every pool should have a cover. That's my personal opinion.
Okay.
You're not, you're just setting precedents for the city, and like I say, people will do what they want to do. It's hard to get out of 4 feet of water.
I'm just looking at the pool I drove
Right.
drove by with this treehouse. If they have a 4-foot high sidewall. If they were required to have another foot on top, that wouldn't happen. Or, I mean, there's got to be whatever you put down here is going to be setting precedent for what people are going to do, and people are going to do what they want to do, essentially, but I'd just like to make it cut and clear for my mind that if something, I don't think because obviously taking the ladder in and out is nobody does it.
Right.
No, I mean, you can go in and out of that pool all you want. So if you have that 1-foot fence on top, littler kids wouldn't be able to.
Because that fence would have to have a gate.
Right.
But if they're not going to take the fence off, why would they lock the gate? I mean, I just think that's,
You put the gate where the steps are and it latches. And so then when you want to go use it, you have to go up and then unlatch it. But I had a padlock.
so it's an
on mine.
automatic, you have to one way or another. I was just thinking that we were talking about taking the ladder out, which would be the deterrent for somebody to get in and when you're not there, but people don't do that.
Yeah.
And so if they're not going to do that, then are they not going to close the gate or?
So then we ask ourselves, what are we doing? I mean, why are we going through all of this work to make an ordinance when we know people don't take a ladder out? And are they going to put a fence up? I mean,
I think you just do something that makes general good sense, and you're not going to be able to monitor all of them. We're not going to have somebody go around to each house that has a pool and make sure every day that they took their ladder out or closed their fence. So, I mean, you just have to make it common sense and hope that people, if somebody drowns and they go to the ordinance and say, well, we didn't know we had to have that. Well, it's in our ordinance. So, I mean, there's some culpability one way or another if something happens that we directed people to do that because we thought that was the most safe. But we can't monitor all of that.
Right.
it's too bad. Like, I went to Home Depot and we were looking at sheds, and they have a little sign that says, please contact your city administrator to find out what the ordinance is for your size of shed, which I thought was great.
Nice.
Swimming
Elizabeth
pools,
instigated that.
like
No.
I said, if you have a 2-foot swimming pool by 18 feet wide, that is 5,000, over 5,000 gallons at 90% capacity. So then, I mean, even your 3-foot sidewall thing is gone. So there's so, people buy pools online. So there's nobody telling them they need to have a permit. So it's a free-for-all. I mean, if we're not going to make something that, I mean, I just want people to be safe.
Yes.
And it's not
Right.
dictating what they do, it's for their own safety. If you're going to be a pool owner, be responsible and be safe.
Yep.
So
Okay.
I don't think
what are
5
you
feet, I don't think 5 feet, a 4-foot sidewall with a foot fence. I don't think that's too much to ask from people, that if you want to have that, that's what, unless you have a fence around it. I had a fence around my deck. I have a girlfriend up in Harris that her pool isn't by her house, and they put a deck around half of it with steps, and it has a gate. The other half that doesn't have a deck has a metal fence that they bought from the company that goes on top. So,
Just as the staff that will be drafting the recommendation for you, are we saying we do want to move to 5 feet, or are we okay with 4 feet as long?
So I'm saying
As-
that this, having a permit at 3 feet or 5,000 gallons, okay? Then you come over here and, well, I can have a 4-foot sidewall without a fence. You know what? Really make it uniform. Anything above 3 feet, you gotta have a 2-foot fence on top of. Or if you have 4 feet, you have to have a foot. Or if you have a 5 feet sidewall, you don't have to.
Okay, because I do have that additional provision, like, as it is right now, if it was 3 feet, because I have that 4-foot standard, they would add a foot of fencing. But you're saying if they have 3 feet, they would need 2 feet of fencing?
That's what I would say.
Okay.
Everybody has to chime in.
And what is it today? Today is it 4 feet or
5 feet.
5 feet today?
It's 5 feet across the board.
And this is clarifying for above-ground pools as a separate category.
I mean, to me, it would make the most sense to leave it, if we had it at 5 feet, to leave it at 5 feet. But I think the whole idea of why we started this is somebody was questioning why they needed 5 feet
For an above-ground pool.
for an above-ground pool.
I'm deeply conflicted.
And I think then the discussion was, do they really need a fence? Today, you need a fence. It says 5-foot fence. And so the discussion at the last meeting was, well, can the pool sidewall be the same thing as a fence for an above-ground pool? And I think everyone here said, you know what, if the sidewall is 4 feet, it could be included, so they don't necessarily need a separate fence. But certainly they could put, a 1-foot railing around the top in order to make it the 5 feet or whatever it is, if it's 3-foot, 2-foot railing. And so that was the discussion as far as what a barrier would be for an above-ground pool. And then we just talked about the stairs going up, the deck, and all those other scenarios. But then you get into building code, because that's a structure.
Yes, and I will I will get into decks on an upcoming slide, just so we are aware of that, so that'll come up in a minute. But right now, the task for what we're discussing right now is, do we want to leave it as a sidewall height at least 4 feet above grade? Do we want to put it back up to 5? And then that would, either way, this would still have, if it's 4 feet, they need, if we decide on the 5-foot standard across the board, that would mean for a 3-foot pool, they'd need 2 feet. If it is the way it is right now, for a 5-foot pool, they would need 1 foot of fencing above. So,
And I did want to just clarify one thing, because I don't know if I wasn't remembering it correctly, but when the city council talked about that 4-foot versus 5-foot a couple weeks ago, I don't know that it was the total consensus that 5 feet should be the number. I thought some people were saying, yeah,
That's what you said earlier.
yeah. Is that what he said earlier? Okay, I was just reading what he has here, but.
yeah, I know from what I saw at the council meeting, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, I know we've got almost everyone. So it was 4-foot pool wall height, 5-foot fence. And I heard a no, maybe?
No?
I don't think,
Yes.
I was with the understanding that if you put up a 4-foot pool, that was sufficient enough. No fence. Above ground 4 foot. That the 4-foot wall would act as the fence.
Yep.
That other extra foot that I think Elizabeth was talking about is if you put a deck on it or something, you had to have a gate. But the idea of my discussion that night was, you're gonna make people put a fence up that's more expensive than the pool, if you're going 5 feet fence around it, a 4-foot pool.
Yeah, and Councilmember Hanegraaff, you can correct me if I'm wrong, just because I am about to do the deck height, or the deck provision for above-ground pools. Like, as you said, for an above-ground pool, 4-foot wall height was kind of, it sounded like what a lot of this council came to that conclusion. I'm sorry, it's really hard not seeing you over, there you are. And then with an accessory deck, that would need a 3-foot high or greater guard railing around the deck,
A deck required railing.
That's if there's a deck.
if there's a deck.
But if you take that pool in the picture right there,
Perfect.
the white rock around the bottom, if that's 48 inches and there's a ladder, it needs no fence. That's what I thought our consensus was. Janet, you were there. The one on the right with that gate around there, or that high little fence that's attached to the pool, you can't buy a lot of these pools with that. Most of the pools come just like the one on the left. They don't come with that.
Right, you buy the fencing and they sell it in pieces because whether you have an oblong pool or a round pool, and it's really not as expensive as you would think.
But if you go buy one of those balloon type, fold out like that,
I just saw one of those.
they do not sell that fencing to go on top. So I guess if it's 48 inches high, I don't know how kids, I think the attorney made a common sense. What was it, common sense? If they don't take the ladder out, that's their issue, it's not ours.
Yeah, you can't regulate common sense.
Right. So I think it was confusing me there when you had the 5-foot fence for a 4-foot pool, because I thought there was kind of consensus that the 4-foot sidewall on the pool was efficient enough.
I might have a
Yes.
thought. So to me, with a 4-foot sidewall like that, now we're hefting, the kid or the person is having to get up 4 feet to go down into the water versus a in-ground pool, you just walk right into it. So I think that's kind of a differentiating thought process. about the 5-foot requirement for the in-ground pool, because I just think they are different.
But then here's the concept to that is an in-ground pool, you have to have a 5-foot fence or a hard cover, and you can just walk in that. So some of these above-ground pools hold just as much
Well, you
water
know,
as the
you can-
in-ground.
You can drown in 10 gallons of
So
water.
do you have, I mean, if they have a 5-foot fence around their yard and that, around their deck area or patio area, they don't need it.
Right, right.
It's when it's sitting out in the yard and it's not even close to the house, that's where I'm saying that would be nice. Yes.
Which one?
Right there.
Right
Oh, that
there.
one?
There.
I think I will ask the council members if they wouldn't mind coming up to the mic, just because I used to have to do minutes, and sometimes it's a little bit hard to hear.
We keep going back to this. We keep going back to this 5,000 gallon thing. You can drown in your sink. So it's not about the amount of gallons, it's about the height. And you're right, I believe we all agreed that the 4-foot wall is a high enough barrier on an above ground pool, like Judy said, you have to climb up and climb down, as opposed to just walking into the in-ground pool. So I believe the best option is the 4-foot. If it has a 4-foot wall, you don't have to buy the extra fencing to go around the top. But that'll change when we get to the decking thing. If it's a deck, and it's not 4 feet above the top of the deck, then that's a different story. But I believe the consensus was, and I think it makes sense, if you've got a 4-foot sidewall, let it be.
Yes.
That's what the
You've still got your 5-foot fence for a below ground, but you've got a 4-foot sidewall, and I think that's plenty sufficient or efficient. Thank you.
Can I just muddy the waters?
Oh, here we go.
Go for it. Go for it.
So, we all picture the little 6-foot diameter,
Kiddie
6-inch
pool.
deep, and you buy them for your pets or your kids, and everybody's got them. What if I have a 3.5-foot high wall? Am I gonna have to put the extensions, but if I have 4 feet, I don't? Is that what you're saying? I believe yes. Okay. Is that common? Has anybody seen a 3-foot sidewall with whirly birds on the side? I mean, I'm just asking.
Well, those fences are made by feet. So you either buy a 1-foot high fence, a 2-foot high fence, or a 3-foot high fence.
So if your standard is 4 feet is acceptable, then anything under 4 feet, you'd have to buy a dimension to exceed it without saying, go get the 1-footer or the 2-footer. You don't care.
Yep.
If it's 2 feet 9 inches, it can't hold 3 feet of water. That's totally exempt from these.
Which is weird.
And again, I don't know what other cities really do, but I just want to tell you, nobody monitors this and nobody does anything. And it gets to that level of where does government draw the line? I mean, you could write a nice purpose statement, and the purpose of the regulations are X, and it's to save lives. Do we do it at 2 feet 9 inches tall and then?
Right.
So here's the thing, the only people that are gonna get monitored are the honest people that come and actually get a permit for it and have it inspected afterwards. So for majority of the people, I don't even think they realize they have to get a permit for a pool, or if they do know, they're just gonna play dumb and go, oh, I didn't know that. So we can write whatever we want, And it's really not gonna matter because the only people that are gonna get inspected when it's all put up and everything are the ones that actually come and pull a permit.
So you're approaching a requirement that
Right.
in
So we'll
ground,
go
you either have a fence 5 feet, nobody's debating that, or the pool cover. You can't put pool covers on these, they don't have the strength to hold them. So 4 feet is that magic standard. Anything less than that, you've got to add the supports, or the,
That's how I see things.
so the combination for any above ground must exceed 4 feet. Somehow that's what you have to write up. My grandson is visiting from Kansas City, and he's got 4 friends, a neighbor, and then 3 other friends. None of them have anything you're talking about. 2 of them have decks, they don't have railings, and again, it becomes a building code issue. That's what I asked Frank. If you're over 24, 28, what is the standard on a porch? Building code says you gotta have this, so I think any deck triggers that. And so what they don't allow in Missouri or require in Missouri, we can't think about. I asked him, what about the ladders? And he goes, what about them? Did they ever pull them out and put them in a shed? Are you kidding?
Right.
So, I mean, if we're legislating something nobody's going to do, where does it get us?
Okay, I'm gonna muddy it even more. Say that's a 12-foot round pool.
No, they're gonna drown in 12 inches like the mayor said.
Yeah, but what about a 16 by 32? Or go 20 by 40, because they sell 20 by 40?
What about it?
Are you still going at 4 feet? Because that 20 by 40's got a whole heck of a lot more water in it.
But it's the same
The
depth.
amount of water is a moot point, I think.
Okay.
Because if you've got 5,000 or 50,000, you're no more likely to drown if you're gonna drown in 50,000.
This is Barb. Oh,
But then it's the access.
It's the access to that 5,000.
Right.
I just think that we're just really getting too deep into all of these conditions. I mean, personally, I think it's just the city wants to have this covered so that in case something happens, the city has a procedure. And like a number of you have said, we can't regulate people. They're going to do what they're going to do, and that's on them. So I don't think we should go into great detail about if it's 2 inches below 48 inches or whatever, you know, just put down a standard, and if it falls below that, it's not our issue. It's whoever's, you know, if you put out a tin horse thing, I mean, my kid used to fill up a 33-gallon tub, you know, plastic.
That's how I grew up.
Yeah, and he'd get in there and he'd cool off and then he'd dump the tub, you know. You can use anything. So I don't think that we should get into such detail. Just cover the basics and,
So 4 feet and 5 feet?
yeah, I think so. And that should cover most of them. We can't cover everything. So, yes.
Just clarify something.
Really loud for me.
I can yell at you.
That works.
You don't need a permit to get an above-ground pool.
Yes, you do.
You do?
If it's, you need a permit if it's over 5,000 gallons and 3 feet.
Never do that.
That's why you didn't get one.
You're being recorded. You're being
Do we have a
recorded.
meter to check the 5,000 gallons?
Yeah, and you know what? I'm okay if you want to do 4 feet. I'm just looking at if you have a 20,000 gallon above ground pool and somebody has a 20,000 gallon in-ground pool, we're putting way more restrictions on that in-ground pool than we are the above ground pool. So I'm just trying to make it uniform so that some of it conforms. I mean, we don't let people build a house way out here when the neighbor's house is way back here because you want it to kind of conform by the neighborhood. So I'm just trying to make this, both of them conform as swimming pools. So if you want to go 4 feet, that's fine. I've had a pool, and I know a lot of people that have had them, and so I know the dangers and what you're allowing and what you're not.
So are we going to vote on this? Are we going to give?
But you got to finish your presentation.
I was gonna say, just, and we can come back to this if we've.
No, please, let's not.
Okay, good. I've gotten direction. The way I have it written, based on what I've heard from everyone, I think is what everyone wants. Above-ground pools, non-climbable sidewall height at least 4 feet, removable steps must be removed when unattended. Above-ground pools with sidewall heights less than 4 feet above, and this is all above grade, must include additional non-climbable fencing, so on the pool wall, so the lowest part of the fence is at least 4 feet above grade. Does that sound like where everyone wants to go for their recommendation on the Planning Commission? Perfect. All right. So let's continue with above-ground pools with an accessory deck. So with this one, I have added a separate standard just for above-ground pools with decks. 2 additions made from the last meeting are that guard railing is required for decks 30 inches or greater above surrounding grade. This is just Minnesota State Building Code, so that's just something I added in at Dean's suggestion, so I'll give credit where credit's due. I also changed that the slat should have no open space larger than 4 inches wide rather than 6 inches. That's something else Dean pointed out to me, and I made that edit. So otherwise, this is kind of what we looked at last time. And I think this aligns with both what the Planning Commission and the City Council want. We're at a 36-inch or 3-foot high guardrail, and yeah. I'll just keep moving along. I don't think this one's too controversial. I'll get to that in a second. I did make a change to the self-closing and self-latching gate subsection. In that, I added that the latch should be inaccessible to small children. Now, with that said, I know at the last meeting it was made known that the City Council stated they did not include this in the code and that they had already discussed this. So before we wrap things up tonight, I want to ask, based on that direction from the City Council, would the Planning Commission rather just have this subsection K5 deleted from their recommendation?
I don't think it should be deleted.
I have strong feelings about that one. I do not think it should be deleted.
No, I don't either.
So, I mean, if you put up a fence, why don't you have to have the gate inoperable unless somebody is there to be able to operate it? I mean, so what kind of gate are we talking about? Just one that swings back and forth that you can?
It's like in a building, apartment buildings have to have a fire door and self-closing hinges. It's for safety.
For safety,
To
right.
keep the fire, it has so much time to burn through that fire door. And that's the same principle here. You don't accidentally leave the gate open, and
So you don't think that it needs to be a latch?
I think it should be a self-closing and self-latching gate.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what.
That's just me.
That's what I'm agreeing with.
Yeah.
Just from my own perspective, and I don't know that I'm speaking on behalf of the whole city council, but I do agree. I agree that this should stay in and not be deleted. I don't know that it's like everything else, it's going to be monitored. But it's there, that this is what we're saying we think is the safest.
Right.
And then it's up to the citizens to do it or not do it.
If it
So
doesn't latch and it doesn't work and they don't want to fix it, that's their problem.
Yep.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yep.
All right. With that said, we, I believe, have come to a conclusion on swimming pool fences. Before we wrap up here, I do want to remind everyone that this recommendation, if you decide to go forward with it, with the changes discussed, there are also some of the minor capitalization edits throughout here. This is more housekeeping ordinance than anything else. And there is also an addition, well, it's more of a reinsertion, as I kind of talked about last time. This was already in the code. When the code was revised, it got taken out. It's just about how garages, tents, campers, accessory buildings, at any time, those can't be used as living quarters temporarily or permanently. This is more of something for me and Elizabeth and Ellie to talk with residents about, because this is already a part of the code essentially. This is just so we have something to point to and says, no, it says it right here.
I have a question, Elizabeth. Approximately how many permits have you issued for swimming pools? I mean,
This year, I can't think of any. Last year and the year before, we issued a lot
Oh,
more.
yeah.
okay.
Did you issue one?
I issued a few, and I remember I handed like, I think at least one or two off to Ellen. I think she had some
But that was last year.
last year, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
This year, I don't remember any.
Yeah.
Did you have, no?
Just trying to get an idea of how many.
I'm sure there's a lot of pools out there.
Yeah.
How many
My next door
actually come
neighbor.
in and get it? Okay. All right.
I think we covered that last time. I just wanted to make a reminder that that is going to be part of this recommendation to the city council. And I'll just leave it to the planning commission if there's any final discussion wrap up, or if you just want to go right ahead with the motion.
Okay.
I think I
Any
have
other
the edits that I
discussion?
need.
Okay. I'll call for a motion.
I'll make a motion to recommend pool fence and housekeeping proposed ordinance amendments with the changes discussed to the city council.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, I'll call for the vote.
Judy, aye, and good luck, Frank. Those changes.
Barb,
you.
nay.
Bethany, aye.
Lynn, nay.
Uh-oh.
The council.
It's a no
Okay,
recommendation.
wait a minute. I'm sorry. Can you help me understand what just happened here? Because I thought these three said aye, and who said nay?
It was 2-2.
I did, and the
two.
reason I said nay is I think all pools should have covers. I voted that way the whole time, so that's why I'm voting no.
Okay. Is that your only, and thank you for clarifying that, and I don't want to interrupt anymore, but I am curious about that.
You can just present to the council that it was 2-2.
Yeah,
I mean, the
2 to-
council is going to make the final decision anyway.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's just how I feel. We can sit here and we can discuss things all night long.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you know, if the council doesn't like what we come back with, they can do whatever they want. So, you know, I mean, I just voted the way I would vote. I like the 5-foot, you know, so now it's in the council's hand to do the 4-foot.
Okay, so just moving it forward, just for properly moving things along. If it didn't pass, can it move to the city council?
It can. The planning commission can vote with no recommendation.
Okay,
Moving forward with, but because 2-2 fails.
Okay.
The motion fails. but it can, they can have a subsequent recommendation saying that it moves forward with no recommendation.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, public open forum.
Throw the
Dirty
man.
dog.
Planning Commissioners report. Does anybody have anything?
No?
Okay, Associate Planners report.
Yeah, just a quick update. I have maps for those who did not receive maps last time. Gonna make sure every planning commissioner tonight leaves with a map, whether they like it or not, if they don't have one. And then we have some for the city council members present. I know Mr. Bush, Councilmember Bush requested one, so I know he's not here tonight, but we'll keep one to the side for him. And at this point, let's see. One other question I had, I wanted to gauge the Planning Commission's opinion on whether an electric vehicle station would be considered as a retail use related to a gas station. Because we recently had an inquiry about that, and I apologize, I don't have the code right in front of me, but
I do. What do you want to look, what the language is?
yes.
So I think Dean can look it up while he's looking it up. I think the policy question is, do you think an EV station is a retail sales of a product, or do you think it's a gasoline station? Because what it says is gasoline sales and retail sales of an accessory nature. So, and now we're coming, we're coming to a point where there are fuel stations that want to put EV stations in. So are we considering that the same as a gasoline sale because it's an electric sale? Or are we saying electric sales are like candy bars and you're selling electricity and that is more of a convenient retail sales? Because that's essentially what the code says. It distinguishes between gasoline sales and accessory retail sales for a convenience store.
I see it as gasoline
Yeah.
sales.
I don't.
Okay.
I feel like I would need to know more. I don't know enough, I feel like, to have a
So what-
valid opinion.
I mean, are you looking for like hybrid cars and?
Well, right, because the car's going to pull up and they want gasoline, but then they want electricity.
Right.
And they want both because
Yeah.
their car's a hybrid.
I wonder how Toby's does theirs, because they have a whole line of electric posts, and people go get gas, and then they go over there and charge it up.
Yeah, it's just our code doesn't address it.
So the specific language in most of the commercial districts, gasoline sales and related convenience retail sales and accessory car wash. So the question is, are we so vague that we should consider an amendment, which I don't imagine anybody would object to, or we call them convenience stores. We don't hardly call them gas stations anymore.
Right.
C-store. I mean, and so, in your opinion, does it allow the EV charging the same as you would fuel dispensing?
It says
We don't
related.
specifically say diesel sales.
right.
Right,
It's to
We
make
say
your car-
gasoline, so
to
if
make
this
your
is,
car go.
right.
if
And it says related, what you read.
When Frank and I talked about it, my suggestion was one of two things. Everybody agrees that, yes, that's included in here, but everybody's got to agree to that. Or the city does an amendment for clarification, which could be done the same night as a hearing for a conditional use. So does anybody feel that we need to amend this, or is EV of such a significant portion of gas stations today that it's part of it.
Can you answer a question? Will the, whoever is setting up these EV stations, are they setting them up where it isn't near gasoline, where the, you know, where the?
Oh, yeah.
So then I think you do need some kind of clarification.
So in my neighborhood, the Target store has,
Yeah,
the furthest row of parking away from the store,
yeah.
they've got like 12 charging
So
stations.
that's with retail. And you might even
And
find them
that's a
in-
retail business.
Right.
I doubt that cities are making these changes, but I think we want a comfort level.
Rosedale Mall has them.
Yeah, they're gonna be everywhere. They'll be no different than a gas station. And so the question is, does this overarching description of what we are allowing, would that not naturally include electric vehicle charging, or would it?
Well, I think to be safe, you should specify.
All right. We'll tell the applicant when we find their application
Is it a
complete, that we'll amend
Convenience
this.
store gas station that's inquiring? Okay, so in my mind, it's the same as going to get gas. I'm taking my vehicle there and I'm gonna charge it.
I think we'll create a separate category because there may be other places like whatever that has nothing to do with gas,
Right.
like Target.
Right.
So we'd create a new, we'd add Z, or no, it'll be AA. It'll be electric vehicle charging stations.
Yeah,
And they can be combined or they can be separate.
right.
Okay, you got your,
Perfect. Thank you, and that is all I have at this time, and you can come see me for maps after the meeting's adjourned.
Okay,
This is Judy. I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
This is Bethany, I'll second.
call for the vote.
Judy, aye.
Barb, aye.
Bethany, aye.
Lynn, aye. Meeting adjourned.